The Nintendo Switch is a console that has been around for a long time. Some might even say too long. But when you've had a console generation that has been going on for over 7 years, you're bound to have a lot of games. And the Switch definitely does. Say what you will about the console itself, and trust me, I have plenty to say about that, you can't deny that the Switch's game library is probably one of the greatest out of all the Nintendo consoles. There are just so many amazing games with so much variety that I think most people can find a game they'll really enjoy on this console. But the downside of having so many good games is that a lot of them end up just sort of getting forgotten and not really talked about. So today, I thought I would go through a few games from my collection that I just sort of completely forgot about. Honestly, this video is mostly just an excuse to talk about some random games that I wouldn't usually talk about, because, you know, sometimes it's just fun to talk about Kirby Star Allies. So the first game I want to talk about is Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu, or Eevee, depending on whatever one you chose. Now, Pokemon on Nintendo Switch has been a very bumpy road, and I can say for sure that I won't be forgetting Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet anytime soon, but when you have two games that are very noticeably not good, you kind of forget about the mediocre game that was released beforehand. The Pokemon Let's Go games were actually the first Pokemon games on the system, and honestly, it was kind of a disappointing start. It's pretty normal for Pokemon to wait a year or two before making a game on a new console, but usually once they do, it's a pretty big deal, but this game just wasn't. It's a remake of the Kanto games, which is honestly fine in concept since the original remakes are also getting pretty old, but this isn't your typical Pokemon game because I guess they wanted to tie this game in with Pokemon Go since that game was popular, so now instead of battling wild Pokemon, you just have the catching system from Pokemon Go but with motion controls. We do still have normal Pokemon battles, but they are only for when you are fighting trainers, which honestly, I think the game set this up in a way that works fine, and it's kind of fun to catch Pokemon in this game with the motion controls. The main decision I don't like in this game is that they only include Pokemon from the first generation, which kinda makes sense since this is a remake of those games, but also the remakes of these games from 20 years ago give you access to more Pokemon, so you know, take that how you will. The main feeling I got the entire time I was playing this game is that it really just feels like a Wii game. The forced motion controls and the graphics that genuinely look like a Wii game ported to an HD console just really make me think that I should be playing this on a different console. I could totally envision someone playing this game with a Wiimote and nunchuck, and honestly, I think I would like this game more if it was on the Wii. Not because it would change the quality of the game at all, but I don't know, it's just more in line with the kind of game I would expect on that console. Another thing to note is that this game is like really easy. To compensate for the fact that you can't evolve your Pikachu or Eevee, they just give them incredibly overpowered stats, meaning that a majority of the battles are absolute cakewalks. This game is honestly just fine, and I don't have any major problems with it, but I can definitely see how I would have forgotten about it, because this game is probably the most generic Pokemon game I've seen in a while. Next up, we have a game that I've actually made a video about on the channel before, which honestly makes it even funnier that it's in this video about games I forgot about. The game I'm talking about is none other than Yoshi's Crafted World, which is honestly pretty fun, but its problem is that there's just nothing about the game that is all that memorable. I think the game's biggest problem is that it's just sort of living in the shadow of Yoshi's Woolly World, which is just an amazing 2D platformer with a very recognizable visual style. I feel like what they were trying to do was expand upon the idea of Yoshi's Woolly World by making the game more about arts and crafts in general rather than just wool or yarn, but honestly, I think it somehow ended up making it less interesting. But like I said earlier, the actual game is pretty fun and mostly just follows the typical Yoshi game formula. The main difference with this one is that it puts a really big focus on things in the background, with the game constantly wanting you to throw eggs at random stuff in the background to get collectibles. This is a pretty cool idea, but I will say that sometimes collecting things in this game can be pretty tedious, but that's really only if you're going for everything, like these really annoying souvenir quests. If you just play the game casually, going from level to level without worrying about all that stuff, this game is a pretty fun time. Only major complaint I have about it is its music, which can get really annoying sometimes, which really sucks since I think Woolly World has a really good soundtrack. As good as this game can be, it doesn't surprise me that I don't really think about it that often because it can just feel pretty bland a lot of the time, and we have another Yoshi game that has a much more interesting visual style and in my opinion is just the better overall game. When you think of a Nintendo game, you usually think of the usuals like Mario and Zelda. Even games that aren't developed by Nintendo but are just published by them like Kirby and Pokemon fit right into the Nintendo lineup and can be just as important for the brand. All of this is to say that when I think of Nintendo, The obvious first game that comes to my mind is Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. This game is such a weird release because it's just so different from what Nintendo would normally publish. I guess they just wanted some of that superhero money since Marvel was at an all-time high when they released this game. This game is honestly what inspired this video because I was just looking through some of my Switch games at one point and I saw this game and barely had any recollection of it. I remember a few things about it, and after playing it again, it's definitely all familiar, but it's just so weird because I think I just played this game when it came out and then never thought about it again. I think the reason for this is because the game itself is just mediocre. It's one of those games where you just take on hordes of enemies, which can be fun, but the combat here is just alright and nothing all that special. I like Marvel stuff, so having a game with a bunch of these characters in it is definitely fun, but honestly, I think I'd rather just play the Lego game for that. In my opinion, the fact that this game exists is way more interesting than the game itself. Like, one day Nintendo just randomly decided that they wanted to bring back the Marvel Ultimate Alliance series, which was never really associated with the company in the first place. Like, yeah, I think some of the games were on the Wii, but I'm guessing most people playing these games were on Xbox or PlayStation. Another really weird thing about this game is that it's called Ultimate Alliance 3, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the previous two entries and instead just feels like a weird Infinity War tie-in game. I can definitely see why I would forget about this game because it really isn't all that interesting, but it is really interesting that it just exists. I would say that two of my favorite video game series of all time are Mario and Sonic. For one of them, it's because it's a series that always seems to deliver and give amazing experiences time and time again. The other is just funny.
A Chaos Emerald? You've got to be kidding me, guys. This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
But if someone came up to me and said that there would be a series of crossover games between these two franchises, you would think I would care a lot about them. But instead, as much as I love the idea of these two series coming together, minigame collections based on the Olympics aren't really the way I wanted that to happen. I had the original game on the Wii, which I remember enjoying fine enough back then, but the one we are talking about today is the game released for the 2020 Olympics. I honestly don't even know why I bought this game. I think I found it on sale and just decided that I wanted to see what's been going on since I last played one of these games. I didn't really forget about this game because I thought it was boring, but it was more because I just barely played it in the first place. For the most part, this game just has the typical Olympic-themed minigames with a few Mario and Sonic-flavored ones sprinkled in here and there, but the main thing I played for this video was the single-player campaign. The story for this campaign is that Mario and Sonic get sucked into this video game console that takes them to the Tokyo 1964 Olympics, where everything looks all old and weird. I do think this is a fun concept, but it's just really weird seeing Sonic's 16-bit sprite hanging out with the 8-bit Mario sprite. It's a weird clash of visual styles, and I can't tell if I love it or hate it. Honestly, sometimes this part of the game feels like it's fan-made, but back in the real world, we have Luigi, who's just wandering around aimlessly trying to figure out what's going on. One thing that is immediately noticeable in this campaign is that we have a lot of dialogue to go through here. Since we don't have the budget for too many cutscenes, this game will just sit there and explain every single thing that happens to you, and believe me when I say that it is not very fun. Then, when you finally get through all of the dialogue, you get rewarded with an Olympic-themed minigame. The minigames here are honestly fine, and I don't really have a problem with them, but I just don't think I'm a guy who really enjoys minigame collections like this. So when I have to sit through a bunch of boring dialogue just so I can get to minigames I don't enjoy, yeah, I'm not a big fan of this one. In the Mario and Sonic sections, there were a few minigames I played that were exclusive to the story mode, and I honestly think these were some of the best in the game because they made me feel like I was actually playing a real game sometimes. Overall, this is a fine game, and I don't hate it, but I probably won't be playing it again anytime soon. Or ever. Since we are already talking about Mario crossover games, I thought we would go ahead and talk about another one with Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. Now this game is one that I was excited about for a while. I really liked the first Mario plus Rabbids game, and that's a game that reminds me a lot of the early days of the Switch, which is just a very nostalgic time period for me. So when I heard it was getting a sequel, I was naturally very interested. But then the game came out, I played it for a little bit, then some other games came out, and I got a little preoccupied making a video about that one Yoshi game I can't remember, and then I never got back to it. During that time, I just sort of forgot about the game and moved on to other stuff, but now I'm back, and what are my thoughts? Yeah, it's pretty good. So this game, like the last one, is another tactical RPG, except now we've dropped the whole grid system in exchange for a little bit more freedom of movement. In general, there is just a lot more freedom in this game to play it how you want to, which the original didn't have that much. You can have whoever you want on your party, Mario isn't mandatory, and you can also completely customize what abilities each member in your party has with the new Spark system. Everyone still has their basic attacks they can perform, but all of the secondary / elemental stuff is done with whatever Spark you have equipped. The Sparks themselves are these weird combinations between Lumas and Rabbids, and they definitely have a distinctive look. Also, we have the part of the game outside of the battles, which usually involves puzzles and other stuff like that. I will say that this game is far more open-ended than the previous entry, which basically just had you going in a straight line from battle to battle. All of this extra freedom you have in this game would make most people think that this is just objectively the better game. But I don't know, sometimes a more linear and focused experience is still nice to have. Not that what this game does is bad or anything, but I wouldn't call it an improvement, but rather its own thing. To me, this is actually a good thing because it means I get to like both of these games, but just for different reasons. Another noticeable thing about this game is that it feels like it features a lot less Mario stuff in exchange for doing its own world building. The game mostly features Rabbid characters as NPCs and stuff, which is fine because all of the Rabbid characters in this game have distinct personalities and character traits, but overall, I think I would have liked a bit more Mario stuff outside of the playable characters. This is a pretty minor complaint though, and I did enjoy the fact that this game featured a lot of original areas and ideas. I didn't play the game too much for this video, but I really did have a lot of fun from what I did play, so this might actually be when I go back and finish. Editor's note, I finished the game, it's really good. I'm playing the Rayman DLC now. Okay, so we have one more Mario game for this video with Mario Tennis Aces. The Mario sports games have never really been my thing, and I've tried to get into them a few times, but I just can't really do it. So why I bought Mario Tennis Aces, I have no clue. This game is a game where you play tennis. That's about all I got. In all seriousness, mechanically, I do think this game has some interesting stuff going on, but I don't know, I'm just not really that good at it. Like Mario and Sonic, this game also has a single-player campaign, which is mostly what I played for this video. I think as far as these single-player campaigns for multiplayer games go, this is probably one of the better ones that I've played, but I'm just not that interested in tennis, so yeah, I wasn't really having that much fun. They do some interesting things, like having boss battles and other mini-games that use the general gameplay of tennis to do some other things, but overall, it's just going around an overworld map and playing tennis over and over again. The best part of the game, though, has to be the opening cutscene where they use sound effects from like 20 years ago that don't fit in at all. Luigi! I can definitely see why I forgot about this one, because it's just not really a game that's up my alley. I haven't played any of the newer Mario sports games like Golf and Strikers, but after playing this one again, I think I might just steer clear of those. Finally, moving on from the Mario series, we have Kirby Star Allies. Now look, I would say I'm a fan of the Kirby series. I've played most of the games, and for the most part, I like almost all of the main series titles. So when I say that I really don't like Star Allies, I think that holds some significance. So this game is yet another 2D entry in the Kirby series, which, I mean, there is nothing inherently wrong with that, but this is also the fourth game to use the exact same style and gameplay, and it's also by far the most boring out of those four. The main noticeable thing is that the level themes are just not that creative and just reuse the same ones you would typically see in most platformers. To be fair, a lot of Kirby games are like this, but this one is especially bad since the level design is pretty weak, so there isn't much making these levels stand out or at least be fun to play through. The game is very clearly designed around co-op play, and I'm sure it is better when playing it with a friend, but I don't think that's a super fair argument since like every game is more fun when you play it with someone else. All of the levels are just so flat with nothing interesting going on at all, and on top of that, since this game is so focused on befriending the enemies in the game, you just constantly have a 4-man squad who can easily take on almost anything thrown at you without much effort, making the game really easy. All of this is especially noticeable since it's following up Planet Robobot, which is not only one of the best Kirby games ever made, but also one that has basically none of the problems I've listed here. But this game does have some other content mixed in there, like the typical mini-games and stuff. One of the modes I played for this video was the one where you can play as all the different characters in the game, and it takes you through a shortened version of the main campaign, which funnily enough I think makes it better. You also have this push to go for a good time, which also gives this mode some fun replayability. I think there was another mode that was added post-launch that was supposed to be pretty substantial, but I never got around to it. Overall, this game is just fine, I guess, but has almost nothing that is super unique or cool about it, leaving it a very forgettable experience. You get it? It's like the video topic. So the last two games we have for this video aren't really Nintendo games like all of the others have been. I don't even think they are exclusive to the Switch, but they're games that I got on Switch that I would eventually forget about, so we're putting them in the video. The first one of these is Pac-Man World Re-Pac. This game is a remake of the first game in the Pac-Man World series, which is one that I had heard about for a while, but just never had the opportunity to jump into. But once they announced this remake, I thought it would be a perfect time to see what it was all about. I got decently far when I first played through this game, but just never saw it to full completion, and after having revisited it, I can definitely see why I did that. The game isn't bad by any means, but it's just not very interesting. This game is probably the most by-the-numbers 3D platformer I've ever played, and that can both be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you're looking at it. On one hand, if you just want a simple but fun little platformer to play through real quick, this is a good option. But on the other hand, if you have any sort of expectation that this game will be anything better than just fine, you're gonna be pretty disappointed. I will say that I do really like Pac-Man's moveset in this game with his butt bounce and dollar store spin dash, and the levels use these moves well. I also like how they incorporated the traditional Pac-Man mazes into the game. It's a fun little nod to this game called Pac-Man, which this game is actually based on. That's a fun fact for you. The way this game is does make a bit more sense when you realize that it's a remake of a PS1 platformer made back when 3D platformers were still a pretty new thing. I do like this game, and I'm glad it got remade because that gives this series more of a chance of returning again in the future, but at the end of the day, it's still just okay. The final game I wanted to talk about is probably the game I've forgotten about the most since I last played it. Like, I don't remember anything from this game, but it is also one of the Switch games that I've had the longest. The game in question, Super Bomberman R. This was actually a launch title for the Nintendo Switch, and trust me when I say that there weren't many of those. So since I had this new console and not many games to play on it, I thought I might as well try out this Bomberman game. I hadn't played a Bomberman game before, and I haven't really since, so clearly this game left a great impression. For most of the games in this video, I did forget about them, but once I saw the box and played them for a little bit, I started to remember more and more about them. This game, on the other hand, I have no memory of. Did I like it when I first played it? No clue. Did I ever beat it? No clue. What even happens in this game? No clue. Going back and playing now, though, yeah, it's fine. Like I said, I haven't played any other Bomberman games, but from what I've seen of those games, this one looks like a pretty standard Bomberman affair. I tried playing the normal multiplayer mode against CPUs, and that's when I learned that I'm not good at Bomberman. The game just consists of you placing bombs to blow up these brick walls so you can eventually blow up enemies or other players. It's simple, and I can see how it might be fun with friends, but it's also kind of repetitive, and I really couldn't see myself playing this with friends for more than like 5 minutes. I also played a very small amount of the single player mode, where I found the voice acting and the cutscenes to be very annoying. The gameplay itself is pretty much just the same as the multiplayer, except there's a bit more map variation, and you have different goals to go for, like defeat all the enemies or press the switches and stuff like that. I personally found it all to be pretty boring. Maybe it's because Bomberman just isn't for me, or maybe it's just bad, I don't know. Biggest takeaway from this game is that the spine for the game case is different from every single other Switch game, and it looks weird, and this stupid game is worthless. So those were all of the Switch games that I forgot about, and then remembered to make this video. Most of these games are just okay and not really that memorable, but then we have a case like Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, where it really was a very good game, but it was just outside circumstances at the time that made me forget about its existence. And then we have cases like Bomberman. But at the end of the day, I'm glad I went back and played some of these games, because sometimes it's fun to replay a game you don't remember that well, because it's almost like you're playing it for the first time again. Super stupid Bomberman, I hate that game.